our lives are just more meaningful, and they feel more meaningful when they're filled with stories. But you need a conscious effort to find and keep those stories.
I got to ask you, though, I mean, obviously you love storytelling. I love storytelling. But what do you love about storytelling? Why of all the things you could have chosen to dedicate your life to, why story?
Pretty much everything that happens in our lives either becomes a story or gets forgotten. Now, my wife is obsessed with making these photo albums, like the old school photo album, the physical one. And I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and so at the end of each year, they get a new album, a new photo album. And I'm looking through it, and I go, oh, this is what we did that year. You know, this is where we traveled. These are the people we've seen. Because I can't remember. You know, I don't remember what happened 4 years ago. Where did I spend my holidays? I don't remember the people I've seen. I don't remember anywhere I traveled. I mean, back in the days that the answer to that question wasn't just from the bathroom to the kitchen and back to the bathroom. But we just don't remember our lives a great deal. And if you ask most people what has been going on with them, they will have a professional answer to it. But if they haven't had children recently, as you and I have had, it's much of a muchness. You know, what happened personally in your life in the last 3 years before you had a kid? You might not be able to answer that. You've been with the same person, lots of stuff going on at work, but your life has been kind of the same, right, in your head.
My wife and I talk about that all the time. Ever since having a kid, we go, what the hell did we do all day before we had a kid? What were we doing with all that time?
Ryan, you had fun. That's what you did. You had fun. You watched a lot of TV. You slept late. You went for spontaneous pizza. This is what you did, Brian.
So funny. So funny. I miss video games. Anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's beautiful what you said. Go ahead.
So if it doesn't become a photo that you can go back to fairly easily, it gets forgotten. And if it doesn't become a story, it definitely gets forgotten. So one of the things that I've experienced for the last 2 years, being someone who puts out stories in video form or in text form on social media on a weekly basis, is that now my life has all these things that happened that I would have 100% forgotten. I did this with my wife yesterday. Yesterday was our anniversary. And I just said, listen, I was going through my list, my daily story list, and stuff that happened 3 weeks before. It's like, do you remember this thing? She's like, oh, that was really funny. I was like, I had completely forgotten about it already. 3 weeks ago, I had completely forgotten about it. So if among many other things, but our lives are just more meaningful, and they feel more meaningful when they're filled with stories. But you need a conscious effort to find and keep those stories.
Let's talk about that, the conscious effort to find and keep those stories. It's interesting. I hear you. Obviously, I listen to your podcast, and I don't just listen to it because I started listening to it because we were friends, but I have found it is literally in my weekly rotation with all the other top podcasts that I've always listened to. I really, really enjoy it. And a little bit later...
And I thank you. I appreciate all my 7 listeners deeply.
Well, on behalf of the other 6, it's really wonderful. It occurs to me a lot when you talk about the kinds of clients you work with that you and I work almost exclusively with the opposite type of client when it comes to story, which is you tend to work with people in business who need to tell stories in business for presentations, for boardrooms, maybe for some speaking engagements, but a lot of very business focused. And I work mostly with TEDx speakers and leaders who need to give TEDx-like talks, things like that. So you often talk about the fact that your clients typically don't even know where to start. They think, well, I don't have a story, or I don't have any stories, or I wouldn't know where to find a story. Where I have the opposite problem. Almost everyone who comes to me has 4 million stories, and they don't know which one to tell in 1 minute on a TEDx application, or which one to hang their TEDx talk off of. So we have a very different sort of client problem that we're solving. From your end, how do you get people to start finding those stories? Where would people listening, right now, where would they start finding stories to tell?
There's a few different approaches. So the one that I find works best, and it's the one I do on workshops, is something called what I call it first, last, worst, best. Okay, I didn't invent it. Nobody knows who invented this, but it works beautifully. You write as many prompts as you want, and you can use things that are professional, like job, boss, project, or you can pick things that are personal, like kiss, car, trip, accident, whatever, whatever comes to mind. And you give this people this directions, first, last, worst, best, write that on the top, and then write all these 7 words or 10 words on the left, and now just write down whatever comes to mind. And everybody has a story about their first kiss or their worst kiss, and their first job and the worst job. And within 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, most people can write down maybe 10 different things that if they really wanted to, they could turn into a story. And I usually make them. I say, okay, now pick one. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Just think it through a bit, and then you're going to come up here and tell it. And very often, those are great stories. They're funny. I mean, the worst kiss and worst job are favorites. Those are almost always a guarantee. So, people come up there and they tell it, and everybody else has fun. And if this is in a training where they had done some type of presenting before, I always ask people to compare. Like, how did they come across telling that story compared to when they were doing kind of like a rehearsed presentation? And everybody says, oh, they just came across so much better. It's like, what about their body language? Like, I didn't even pay attention. Like, did they and ah a lot? Don't know, didn't pay attention. So what do you mean? Well, I was just listening to the story. And then a lot of people go, I see what you were doing there. It's like, yes.